Hello Internet and welcome to Something New. This young man right here is Thomas Kincaid. He's currently 23 years old and unfortunately he's unemployed. Partially this was due to the fact that his family was wealthy so he never really had to work, but also just a general lack of ambition. He did play football in college before dropping out, but more recently he struggled because of a zombie apocalypse. In this series, we will follow Thomas's exploits as he travels across the land, he'll fight some zombies, he'll make friends with NPCs, and no, never mind, he fucking died immediately. Alright, look, I haven't played this game in a while, and I accidentally chose the hospital start and I got wrecked, okay? It happens, whatever. Look, anyway, Thomas had a sister, her name is Lara, and seeing as I'm a bit out of practice, we're gonna go ahead and say that she made her way safely to an evac shelter as the world was falling apart. This series is going to be a mix of me playing the game, but also trying to work some roleplay in there as well. Thomas and Lara were names that I pulled from the Dresden Files, which is a book series that I'm pretty fond of. In those books, Lara is a pretty powerful and unique character, and unfortunately I couldn't really make her exactly in the game. When her character is first introduced, she's actually, let's just call her a model and leave it at that. So I decided that our in-game Lara will also have the modeling background. I also gave her the sewing background because it seemed a reasonable adjacent thing for her to have. Why not? I don't know. After that, however, I did sort of forget the roleplay aspect and just built the character that I normally build in my Let's Plays. It's been a while since I played Cataclysm for any length of time. I was afraid to try anything new when I'm really out of practice. I shouldn't have done that. I should have done a better job at crafting a character, but you know, we can work with this. We can just roleplay more during the actual game. And it wasn't until much later that I realized I also gave her the ugly trait, so yeah, apparently Lara is an ugly model. I'm just gonna go ahead and pretend that we don't have the ugly trait. However, I am trying to work up some AI illustrations for this series, and I probably will give Lara freckles. And I know some people hate freckles, so maybe we'll just pretend that that's why people consider her ugly. And if you have freckles, by the way, I love you, you're beautiful, don't take that personally, I'm just riffing here. And she does have the stylish trait. I mean, that's kind of modelly, right? She's stylish. Anyway, Lara is 5 foot 7 inches tall and 22 years old. Her days just prior to the game were spent desperately fleeing the area where she lived in hopes of getting to a more rural location. She'd heard of a refugee center and an evac shelter in the next county, and she had to pick between the two. Moving on foot with barely any of her belongings, she quickly lost contact with her brother, which was really her only family member in the area. His last text said that he was going to the hospital for an injured arm, and that was the last thing she'd heard from him. When she arrived at the evac shelter, she did find someone else to already be there. This is a gentleman called Mandukes, which is 100% a fake name that he made up. In talking to him, Lara decides to play it kind of meek to make her seem like the damsel in distress, which in a lot of ways is correct. She is a damsel in distress. She appealed to Mandukes' masculinity, suggesting that he could protect her. Unfortunately, he rejects this invitation, and so sadly we miss out on our first possible NPC companion. I don't remember how often you can try to recruit them, but we will revisit this at some point in the future. Taking a look at the map, she realizes this is not an ideal location. The evac shelter is located near the swamp, and if the news broadcasts prior to the shutdown are to be believed, strange, monstrous creatures will lurk within. There is a farm to the northwest and a town to the southeast. Unfortunately, there is a football field there, a cemetery, and a playground alongside a few basic houses. There will probably be quite a few zombies there, which is something that Lara had successfully avoided up until now. First, however, she needed to take inventory of the supplies in the evac shelter. People were expected to group here during an emergency, and so it stood to reason that there would be supplies, assuming of course that Mandukes did not claim them all for himself. Many of the cupboards contained food items, and the lockers contained additional gear as well. Lara's arrival at the shelter had been basically with nothing, and so she takes an emergency jacket from a locker and puts it on. It's not really any kind of protection, but it is better than nothing, although its encumbrance seems weirdly high when compared to other jacket-type garments. Now in the basement, she found some more miscellaneous supplies, the most important of which were a couple of first aid kits. I did also take the time to rip these apart. I wasn't really sure what all was in a first aid kit nowadays. And the most important things here, of course, are the antiseptic, the bandages, and the aspirin. Aspirin is currently our only painkiller, and it probably will be for a while unless we luck into finding something pretty great. The bandages and antiseptic will enable us to treat wounds as well moving forward. Surely we are going to get injured at some point. And those of you who have been playing recently, you probably know that enemies grabbing you is a bit out of control at the moment, so I do expect a lot of deep bite wounds, which of course makes that antiseptic all the more valuable. Lara deposited these supplies upstairs, deciding that the evac shelter would serve as a base at least temporarily. And unfortunately, this is kind of where I as the player got a little bit stun-locked. I couldn't really decide what I should do. It's been like probably over a year since I really played the game for any long amount of time, and I knew that I would be recording this, so I felt like I don't know, weirdly anxious about people judging me for playing badly. Now I ultimately decided that, we should probably check out that farmhouse to the northwest. Lara had seen plenty of news reports, and her travel to the evac shelter had shown her how dangerous the outside world was. A farmhouse seemed a lot less intimidating than heading into town. There would be fewer people at the farm. Plus, she'd seen season 2 of The Walking Dead and knew there was relative safety to be found in such a place. But she also knew that she needed to arm herself before she ventured outside. She struggled a bit to find something she could make with the materials that she had on hand, and eventually just couldn't really come up with anything. However, there was something from her youth related to improvised weapons. When Lara was in her early teens, she dated a local boy called James. Like most teenage boys, he was obsessed with video games, and being the dutiful girlfriend, she'd sit on the couch and watch him play. One of them had been a horror game. She couldn't really remember the title, but she did remember that it was kind of scary. In the game, the main character, detective type guy, was always ripping things off the walls to use as weapons. This included metal pipes with bulbous pipe fittings on one end like a makeshift mace. And so Lara decided to make something just like that for herself. She smashed one of the lockers and obtained a pipe, and then headed back downstairs where she could smash a sink to get herself a pipe fitting. After screwing the fitting on the end of the pipe, she had an improvised mace, albeit a pretty poor quality one. Having a weapon in her hands did make her feel suddenly more confident. She explained to Mandukes that she was going to go out looking for supplies, and the man didn't object, but he also didn't volunteer to go with her either. And so with that, Lara began venturing to the farmhouse, and this is where I realized that I forgot to select cosmetic traits in character creation and that Lara's sprite was bald. So I debug spawned the items necessary to change her appearance. In the Dresden files, I believe that Lara is super pale with brown hair, so that's what I gave her in the game here. I don't really care for most of the hairstyles that are in the game, to be honest, and the skin tones were all a little too pale, so I did give her a bit of a tan. Ultimately, this doesn't really matter. We don't actually see those details very much since we usually bury ourselves in armor anyway. And then for the record, I did drop all the things that I debug spawned to change our appearance. I'm not keeping them, it was just to, adjust it for recording. Approaching the farmhouse gave Lara chills. She had hoped to find people here, but instead it looked deserted. It looked a lot like most farmhouses in the area. It was old, but it was reasonably maintained. A patchy gravel drive led into a fenced-in area, and she could see a greenhouse and a barn even from the road. With no one in sight, she proceeded cautiously, wary that an angry shotgun-toting farmer could appear at any moment. However, it did quickly become clear that if there had been people here, they had already moved on. Most likely, they were already dead, like pretty much everyone else. And so, unfortunately, with that feeling of hope slowly draining away, she moved inside and began to steal every single thing that was not nailed down. She quickly found a windbreaker to replace her emergency jacket, and then moments later she stumbled across a pretty nice leather jacket. The leather seemed like a natural choice, offering some amount of protection for when she inevitably came across some of the undead. In the end, she did come away with a few things of moderate value, including several books and a food dehydrator that seemed like something that would come in handy later. I also did grab the Eclipse glasses because if I recall correctly, they can still be used for welding goggles, which is pretty silly, but whatever. There's no roleplay reason for this, I just know as a player that these have some kind of value, so I took them assuming we could use them eventually. Moving to the rear, Lara discovers that the greenhouse actually only contains roses. They weren't fully grown yet, and she didn't think that roses were edible, so she just moved on. Cautiously approaching the barn, she could hear the faint sounds of movement within. Being very careful, Lara moved up, and to her surprise, she discovered a horse. Now, she had ridden a horse maybe 3 times in her life, and she wasn't sure if she'd remember how to do it. But a horse seemed like a valuable asset in the zombie apocalypse, especially since she'd been walking everywhere up until now. She did discover some horse tack nearby, and she went through the motions of saddling the horse, surprised that she even remembered how to do it. After mounting up, she rode around a bit just to get her bearings and checked some of the nearby buildings. Each time she dismounted, the horse bolted off immediately. Until she found a way to properly keep the horse in place, this would probably be an issue. Luckily, inside the small carriage house, Lara did find a pitchfork. It wasn't a true weapon, not really, but at the time she had been using a simple pipe mace. Holding one in each hand, it seemed like it was no contest. The pitchfork was sturdier and gave her better reach. Not to mention the fact that her pipe mace seemed like it would bend in half at first contact with the enemy. As Lara departed the farm to head back to the evac shelter, she felt a warm sense of accomplishment. Finding the horse seemed like a real boon. Animals had a way of soothing people. Therapy and emotional support animals were a thing for a reason. As she rode back to base, she held the pitchfork tucked under one arm, pointed down so she wouldn't accidentally impale her new horse friend. Every now and then, she would pat the neck of her new horse. She would have to name him eventually if she would be riding him for any significant length of time. Lara deposited her loot in the evac shelter, and Mandukes didn't seem particularly interested in picking up any of the supplies. She figured he would probably take some food and drink now and then when she wasn't looking. However, if they remained together for any significant length of time, he would have to start making his own supply runs, or there would inevitably be some conflict. It was still early in the day, and it seemed prudent to continue looking for supplies and survivors. The horse seemed to have become very attached to Lara, following her around the evac shelter. It seemed too dangerous to take it into the city. Once again, she had seen The Walking Dead. She knew how that would end. So instead, she tried luring it downstairs and eventually settled for just shutting it in the back room. Sorry about that, horse. We will drop some food in there just to keep you from going hungry, I guess, to roleplay things out a little bit. But anyway, venturing out again, I personally felt pretty nervous. I wasn't really sure how densely packed the football field would be, but once I got eyes on it, there really didn't seem to be very many monsters. We did pass by a hunting blind as well, with nothing of note inside. I'm not really sure what the point of that location is, but eventually we made our way to the nearest house. And unfortunately, it was here that Lara came into contact with a zombie for the very first time. She, of course, had seen them on the news and heard about them on radio broadcasts, but she had never been confronted by one on her own. Her hands gripped the pitchfork tightly, hoping it would not be a difficult encounter. The man shambled towards her, wearing a tattered t-shirt and jeans, and cautiously, Lara engaged. She tried to keep her distance from the creature as much as possible as she poked at it with her pitchfork. Surprisingly, it actually went down pretty easy, her first kill in the zombie apocalypse. The man had never even gotten close enough to lay a finger on her. However, this was no time to dwell on her killing the thing, as a tougher-looking zombie quickly approached. This posed much more of a problem, and the creature instantly latched onto her and began biting and clawing at her exposed flesh. A particularly deep bite on her arm lanced pain through her body, and she struggled to kill the monster. And here, Internet, is where I need to once again point out that the state of grabs in the version I'm playing right now is a bit rough. They are currently very potent, they happen very frequently, and they're actually pretty hard to break. There is supposed to be a fix for this any day now, but I did record this when they were still pretty brutal. I'm hoping this gets resolved very soon, but there's probably a couple weeks between me recording and you seeing this, so I'll announce when they kind of get fixed. After the fight, Lara was in quite a lot of pain. She was bleeding, she had a severe bite wound, and it was oozing blood and clear fluid. She needed to find a way to clean herself up, but to do that, she would have to continue clearing out the enemies. She knew ultimately that there were first aid kits back at the evac shelter, but she wanted to press forward, hoping to find something a little closer. Now, as she was clearing things out here, the most noteworthy zombie she came across was a cop zombie. It did drop a few handgun magazines and a Kevlar vest, which is probably the most valuable thing, but unfortunately the holster did not contain a weapon. Now, eventually Lara was able to begin looting, although she was in unimaginable pain, which slowed her down considerably and knocked her stats down to less than ideal. She kept eating aspirin, but the pills just were not designed to deal with a zombie biting a huge hunk of flesh from your arm. Moving into the house, she first checked the garage and, to her surprise, found a completely functional vehicle. This would ultimately be a lot better than a horse in terms of both movement and in transporting loot. It's actually probably like the best possible thing we could have found, as it's going to spare us a lot of walking back and forth and give us more mobility. In terms of looting, Lara needs pretty much everything. We don't have anything. There was basically nothing at the evac shelter, and looting the house provided a lot of low-tier but still valuable items. The junk drawer in the kitchen, for example, gave her hammers and screwdrivers and long strings, a source of fire, and etc., etc. In addition to the food, she also found a knife drawer and stole all of the steak knives. For making spears in the future, we actually do need knives, and I couldn't remember if you could use steak knives or not. Regardless, though, they are still a source of the cutting quality, so, it is something. Now, Lara's bite wound was paining her terribly. It was all she could think about as she sifted through drawers and cabinets looking for supplies. Once her pack was full, she decided to walk back to the shelter. It seemed a little early to start the car since she hadn't cleared the area, and of course zombies in the area would hear her start the engine. Once she was back home, she offered a sarcastic salute to Mandukes and then dumped her supplies on the floor. In an effort to clean her bite wound, she used some alcohol wipes to clean and disinfect the area. It took several wipes. Obviously they were not designed for this task, and it stung horrendously, but eventually she was satisfied that she had done a good job disinfecting. And with that, internet, I think this first video is going to draw to a close. It seems really short to me, like I didn't really accomplish anything, but it looks like it's probably going to come in at about 20 minutes. Now, I've never made anything like this before. I have no idea. I suspect it's going to be terrible, but I'm going to go through the motions of making it anyway, and hey, hopefully you like the video. I'm also going to try to work up some AI images so that I can illustrate certain parts of this video. I doubt there's very much of it in the video, but it's something unique. I hope that turns out well. And for information regarding the AI that I use and stuff like that, people always ask. I'll put something in the description about that if you want to see it. Anyway, I hope you liked the video. I hope it turns out well. I have no idea how long this series will run, but yeah. If you did enjoy it, maybe hit me with a like. It lets me know that this wasn't god-awful and that people would actually like to see more. Hopefully none of you noticed that I constantly change tenses from present and past tense because I'm a terrible writer. Anyway, I hope you had a nice time. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back in the near future with another episode.